Did you know that in 2020, vinyl record sales overtook CDs in the United States? Those little shiny compact discs are a dying breed. People don't collect them like they used to. In fact, one small tweet from a teenager who doesn't know how to use Google sent millennials into an existential crisis when she asked what burning CDs even meant. But I'm willing to bet if you took Generation Z and showed them a record player, they'd know exactly what it is, how it works, how good the scarred black polyvinyl chloride can feel on your fingertips, how psychedelic an album cover looks on a sleeve, and how douchey some people can be over the quality of sound that comes from it. This clear growth in record sales has led to the music industry pushing one clear message: vinyl is making a comeback. It's not just music lovers jumping on a bandwagon and following a trend though. For a lot of people, vinyl records let you knock back nostalgia like tequila shots. A sexy enough record player can become the centerpiece of a living room. Not the kind that look like they actually existed in the 1940s though. Oh no, we can't actually embrace vintage. But a minimalist design with pastel colors, now that could be just the thing people comment on at a party. We love to be reminded of the old, so long as the old is painted with the new.
My name's Kana. What are you two doing out here, alone in the forest?
Oh, hi Kana, didn't see you there. Kana Bridge of Spirits feels like it's been made just for me. It's got the collect-a-thon style of a mascot platformer mixed with the thematic concentration of a Ninja Theory game and the boss difficulty of a Souls-like. Yet somehow it manages to fuse this all together into an identity all its own. At times, the nostalgia feels warm and fuzzy, reminiscent of titles decades old, but more importantly, Ember Lab understands their audience. The initial trailers may have coated themselves in the cute factor, leading many of us to think Kana will be just another silly platforming adventure, but the atmosphere has an unexpected maturity, and the combat has a sort of crunch that capital G gamers have gravitated to all these years after we giggled at Mario's first jump. Now that's not to say if Jak and Daxter was remade tomorrow or Spyro finally got a worthy sequel that I wouldn't care. I've been hanging out my window with a megaphone begging Toys for Bob to give us something since the Reignited trilogy came out, but throwing myself into Kana's world has made that part of my soul ache a little less. The visuals are what the game was sold on. Everybody wanted 50 rot plushies after that first reveal, but Ember Lab have crafted something which is so much more than just a set of gorgeous cutscenes. The village and surrounding lands are so much fun to explore. There's joy to every jump, a cheer to every chime, a bravado to every boss fight, and a nourishment to how it handles its theme of grief. I feel nourished after hitting the 100% mark, and I didn't want to leave it. You could pigeonhole it into a variety of genres: action-adventure, a platformer, a collect-a-thon, baby's first Dark Souls if you're being facetious, and I'd argue all of those are fair and unfair, because as an experience it's greater than the sum of its parts, even if some of those parts are fantastic. However, whilst I'm going to be throwing a lot of praise Kana's way in this video, I have my fingers and toes crossed that there's a sequel so Ember Lab can iterate even further, because I do have some criticisms. Nothing which spoiled my enjoyment. A lot of my bugbears are jumping into the grit of its design. I would change nothing about Kana's philosophy or ideas, but sitting comfortably in a chair with a microphone in front of me, who the hell do I think I am, I would change some of the application of those ideas. It's a Game of the Year contender in a year where indies are dominating that list. It understands its influences and is emboldened by them, not ashamed. I'm sitting with a special kind of feeling I can imagine music enthusiasts have when they rig up a shiny new record player. There's only one question you need to ask yourself when assessing Kana's quality as a game. If it didn't look as beautiful as it does, would it still be so beloved? I'd argue yes, and here's why. This is a commentary and critique of Kana Bridge of Spirits. We open in darkness. Nothing but the tinkling of a few disparate spirit crystals to give us Kena's form and stature. This entire section of working through the cave is here to tonally ground Kena in whimsy and mystery. The game is visually trying to conceal its secrets from us. Oh, sure, the luminescent blues are beautiful, but the lush colours which wait outside are heightened simply because the player needs to methodically build to that reveal. First there are the small glowing dots, then with our pulse we light a couple of torches. Travelling through the stone and rubble, the torches double in their amount. Kena is slowly illuminating the space, bringing more of the game world into view, and with the way these gems react to her crystal beckoning to her, it's as if the village has sleepily been waiting for her arrival. This is nothing new. Video games have started us off in barren darkness for years so they can later contrast it with the gorgeous visuals which soon await. Rayman 2 did just this back when Ubisoft made good games. It's such a simple yet affecting trope that you think someone smarter than me would have named the phenomena by now, but what I really like about Kena is how it uses that contrast. The blues aren't just blue, they pierce the darkness of the cave, and this will happen in all future caves the player will explore. The power which is here is guiding Kena to her target. These winks of blue are as close to a welcome as the player gets. The game's vibe above all else is one of warm earnestness and sincerity. There's really only one joke in the whole adventure, this moment later when our first rot is trying to creep away from Benny and Saya, masked behind a frail little leaf. There is humour to be found. The game is cute and charming, and I got a right good giggle out of putting hats on the rot, but Bridge of Spirits isn't concerned with sugary jokes or punchlines. Other platformers with a colourful, cartoonish art style regularly give us a sidekick which jabbers away in your ear, establishing a rapport to keep the humour ticking along. Ratchet & Clank have an entertaining, reluctant partnership which blossoms into friendship. Banjo is easygoing, but Kazooie loves to rail on the various characters the duo meet. Jack is severe, fueled by vengeance, but Daxter...
Oh, don't worry. Jack beats things all the time. Hey, Jack?
Why do I love these games again? Aside from the rot, which we'll get to, Kena has no vocal, Disney-fied sidekick to interrupt her meditative exploration. She's in grief, mourning the loss of her father, and much of her muteness allows the player to just drink in the atmosphere of the game. It's an interesting choice, and it feels purposeful, but it's also led to one of the game's more widely held criticisms. Mitchell Saltzman of IGN wrote, "It's a bit of a bummer that we never really get to learn all that much about Kena. You get hints of her background and history, but never anything that lets you get to know her in the same way you get to know the spirits and other characters that she ends up interacting with. It's a shame because she's the one we spend the most time with, and everything else about her is awesome and made me want to know more." And I agree, with a caveat. Bridge of Spirits' story isn't about Kena, not really. It's theme first, plot second, and it uses the tragedy of the village to strengthen and explore its theme of grief and the importance of acceptance in that journey. For much of the adventure, Kena feels like a vehicle for the player to catch glimpses into the lives of the spirits she heals, and I get the sense that Ember Lab purposefully minimized her voice so that her actions could speak louder than her words. By the time the credits roll, we learn just a handful of things about our main character. 1. She's a spirit guide, a job she takes extremely seriously. 2. She's lost her father and is mourning him. And 3. She's incredibly empathetic. And that's kinda it. Everything else are traits the player will apply to Kena through their time controlling her, much like we do with Link in Legend of Zelda games. For example, we can see that she isn't a destructive person through how she interacts with objects in the world. Kena can't break anything, she can't roll into boxes or smash open crates. She is supremely respectful of the property left behind by the dead. However, the difference between Link and Kena is that Kena has a personality and goals outside of what we project. It's just that we only catch a glimpse of this because the game is so focused on the story of the spirits. Now, there's one way I would remedy that. Generally, I hate when video game protagonists wonder aloud to themselves with nobody else in the room. Generally. But there are exceptions. When Cal Kestis is united with BD-1 in Jedi Fallen Order, he nervously babbles to the little droid for the rest of their time together so that we can gain some insight to how his mind works. Some in-game monologuing from Kena chatting to the hero Rot on her shoulder would help to add layers to how she sees this world. What does she think of the spirits she meets? Does she think Benny and Saya are adorable or annoying? Do any of the stories she's told by the spirits remind her of the stories her father told her? Constant chatter would get grating really fast, I know, but some introspection from her, dotted throughout the world, using the hero Rot as the world's cutest therapist, could add a lot of depth and strengthen her friendship with these creatures even further.
I sense suffering here, Spirit. Do you need help?
You know nothing of suffering.
Everything I've just said is wrapped up in her first line of dialogue. The spirits we follow through the caves guide us to our first puzzle solution, engendering a sense of trust from the player, meaning when we enter this suspicious-looking arena and see one spooky guy ominously surrounded by our guides, it yells "threat" to a player like a drunken Ripto. But Kena is concerned. And that's what makes her so endearing, despite how thin our overall knowledge is about her. The first thing out of her mouth is compassion for another character, not a comment on the space, or a quip, or any of the typical chimes we'd hear from a protagonist of a game like this. Toshi is an imposing villain. For all the trailers and wide-eyed furballs we've seen in the marketing, he is our first impression of what the game is really all about, and the severe threads which undercut its narrative. I love this introduction, but what I love more is how the game's first hour embeds itself not in the Disney Pixar methodology, but a Studio Ghibli one. The comparisons between Kena and Disney are totally fair. All of the characters have the huge, kind Disney eyes which have typified those films. The visuals, through dint of simply being gorgeous and three-dimensional, give off a surface-level Pixar vibe. If for nothing else, 2021 will be the year that PS5 owners tweeted, "It feels like I'm playing a Pixar movie." But philosophically, Kena draws more from Hayao Miyazaki than John Lasseter.
Fear, anger, and disgust.
Up until the last few years, Pixar films have always been about people finding themselves through taking down the bad guy. The Incredibles come together as a family to kick Syndrome's ass. Sully and Mike overcome their prejudice and wreck Waternoose. The bad guys are always bad in these films and get their just desserts. Hopper gets eaten by a bird in A Bug's Life. Muntz falls thousands of feet to his death in Up. Miyazaki's films have always complicated good and evil. He's gone on the record as saying, "See the good in that which is evil and the evil in that which is good. Pledge yourself to neither side, but vow instead to preserve the balance that exists between the two." In Spirited Away, Chihiro doesn't melt the evil witch with water, she earns her freedom and escapes, leaving Yubaba with lessons learned about how she treats her people. Despite No-Face trying to eat her, she invites him onto the train and he later finds peace with Zeniba. Bridget of Spirits and Kena herself are not interested in painting anyone as truly villainous, but as a game, it's not afraid to show us the horrors which come from villainy. Toshi's mask, specifically with its demonic antlers and twisted wood, reminded me a lot of the Northman from Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice, and that wasn't where the comparisons ended.
What happened here, little guy?
This moment is fascinating. The hero Rot, in its wisdom, seems visibly upset when it sees Kena's glowing veins. Whatever this is, it doesn't comfort it, it seems worried, and it's a shame that Bridge of Spirits doesn't do anything with this thread. If the game came across as any less deliberate in its overall structure, I'd argue that it was a plot point the team forgot about. Perhaps Kena's connection to the spirit world is affecting her health. However, so much of the game feels carefully crafted that at worst, I'll put it down to a clumsy seed for a sequel. Whatever it is, I really hope it gets acknowledged and explored in Kena 2. Leaving the darkness comes an obvious lightening of tone, and it's where the Ghibli comparisons continue. The rot reminded me a lot of the soot spiders from Spirited Away, or some of the creations we know from Princess Mononoke. The statues covered in moss reminded me of the carvings we see in Miyazaki's gorgeous animations, but the considerations it makes of Indonesian culture and Shintoism, a belief system Ghibli films often embrace, strengthens this comparison past just the game's aesthetic. The music is where we see the Indonesian inspirations most directly. The game's composer, Jason Galati, reached out to the ensemble group Gamelan Kudamani to form Kena's sound, using traditional gamelan instruments like bamboo flutes, rebabs, and sittars. The difficulty for Galati was when he was informed that some of the music pieces he wanted to incorporate into Kena's soundtrack were actually considered sacred music, so he and the group's founding director, Deva Putu Barata, had to recreate the same style using original compositions. Bridge of Spirits music isn't just ambient. Distinct themes and motifs are planted and enhanced as the story progresses. When we hear the childlike chorus of it presents the rot as innocent and playful, but these notes transition into something much more triumphant towards the end of the game, when we help Zajuro and Toshi pass on. Now, regarding Shinto, I'm clearly not an expert. It's an area I've only become interested in after playing Kena. The last thing you need is a pasty Scottish guy pretending he's an expert on a religion he was unfamiliar with, and I've linked some of the more qualified sources I've taken this information from below. But this stuff is super interesting, and I spent 12 hours devouring videos and papers on the matter, so goddammit, I'm going to share what I learned. Shintoism is primarily concerned with kami, which in English loosely translates as gods, deities, or spirits, though it seems the true nature of kami can't accurately be described with words. These spirits regularly have their own domains and spaces which they preside over. The important thing to note about kami is that initially they were looked upon as dangerous. They would destroy your crops if you don't appease them, and this is an idea we see continued in Kena's mythos. The people of the village had their crops burn away and a famine set in, with Toshi blaming the rock god for their troubles. The two statues we most commonly see throughout, the fox and the owl, also link to Shintoism and how Studio Ghibli treats good and evil. Foxes, or Inari, can be both a benevolent force or a malevolent force in Shintoism. They don't strictly link to one or the other, much like the rock god's true nature. It oversees vast cultivation and growth, but it's also the reason why the famine hits the village, both good and bad from the perspective of the people. Owls bring both luck and protection from suffering in Shintoism. It's the latter which I find most interesting, considering all of the spirits in the game are suffering, despite their chipper nature. All of this sounds like a bit of a stretch, I know. After all, the writings and carvings we see in stone throughout the game don't use Japanese characters. Kena's name has more in common with Hindi than Japanese, appropriately meaning a beautiful flower. Bridge of Spirits isn't conscientiously linking itself to Shintoism in a literal sense, but the imagery is all here, especially in the way tori are used.
Hey, what are you doing here in the forest?
I'm searching for the sacred mountain shrine. Can you take me there?
See this? These cool looking gateways you've typically seen on postcards from Japan, these are called tori. Their purpose is to separate sacred shrine grounds from the human world. How interesting then that Kena's tutorial ends with her walking through a gargantuan set of tori and looking out across the game world in this sublime vista shot. How doubly interesting that typically before entering a tori, you're expected to purify yourself at a nearby water station. The ritual of oharai or misogi is so important in Shinto. In this video from the channel Life Where I'm From, they explain that some priests would rather you not enter a sacred space at all than do it without purifying yourself. Kena, during our opening in the cave, is guided to a pool of water before the rot reach out to her, as if the spirits are encouraging her to purify herself of the outside world before she enters the rot's domain. In fact, Bridge of Spirits pulls a lot from Shintoism's focus on rituals. Meeting Zaju, he tells us,
We have always crafted wooden masks to honor those who have passed on. Placed here, the masks slowly turn to dust, aiding the spirit's journey into the next life.
Zaju is the village elder, and much like the crystals and spirits that guided us in our opening cave, there's a real sense that he's been waiting for us. While he sits at the shrine, carving masks for the very spirits we'll soon help pass on, he doesn't have a mask on his person. It's hidden away in one of the many chests we can find. It's a neat bit of visual storytelling to highlight his determination to assist us in our quest. He's been holding out for a spirit guide to pacify his people. This emphasis on rituals is conveyed through the masks. The carving of them, the placing of them in shrines, that's a pivotal ritual in the culture of our nameless village. Hell, the game even opens with an explanation of why they're so valuable in this world. In its own words, they are carved to honor the dead. Placed in sacred shrines, these masks gradually return to dust, symbolizing the spirit's journey to the next life. Rituals bring us comfort, especially during tumultuous times like a period of grief. They can help ease in a gradual sense of closure, which makes them a really affecting game loop for Bridge of Spirits to embrace. And it does embrace it, whether it means to or not, both in its structure and its world design. So with Kena armed with her first mask and preparing to set off on a mission to find Taro, let's look at the most vintage part of Kena's design philosophy and how it makes the most of it.
Surprised that Benny and Saya found you. They are clever children, and would do anything for their brother.
Bridge of Spirits level design made me feel silly. When Ember Lab's co-founder Josh Greer referred to it as a wide, linear game, I arched an eyebrow, not entirely sure what he meant. But after just an hour exploring the forestry, it became clear that there really wasn't any other way to describe it. The village at the center of the map sits like the needle of a gramophone, rings of trees, pathways and rivers winding out from it, branching off into 3 biomes to explore. The village acts as our hub, giving us the shrine as a visual guide of our progress, adding masks as we help the various spirits pass on. I love how as Kena's abilities grow, this central hub expands, unearthing secrets, collectibles, more rot and spirits to help, simulating the impact of her healing presence on this little community. What's so interesting is how the game's structure continues this pattern of rituals. Zaju gives you a spirit mask, you find 3 relics, purify them, and repeat. But this is even true of the micro goals the game presents as Kena explores. Enter a clearly defined combat arena, kick some ass, cleanse a forest of corruption, repeat. And with a game loop like this, there's a danger that Bridge of Spirits might start to feel tedious once you peel back the curtain, but it doesn't at all. If anything, when I finally put the game down, I was craving more. So how does the game achieve this? Well, the first way is by being fluid in its exploration. A very different F word to freedom, a buzzword we're seeing more and more in reviews which give a pass to empty game worlds by saying it offers the player so much freedom to do nothing of interest. There's nothing to see or do except bandit camps as far as the eye can see, but you have the freedom to pick which direction you run in for 20 minutes. Oh look, the Master Sword broke after hitting a bokoblin 3 times, giving me the freedom to be forced into using a stick instead. Freedom! Freedom! Kena doesn't necessarily give the player freedom in its world design. There is one road to follow to each goal, with branching paths leading to new, shiny collectibles, but there's a fluidity to the world design which gives it a really immersive illusion of freedom. Bridge of Spirits isn't overly complicated, but options are provided to the player, and the world does open up the longer you play. Let's look at a more specific example. Hunting for Taro, Benny and Saya regularly appear to ease us into the world. They spend much of this first biome flitting in and out of view, giving us guidance, advice and lore tidbits. It helps keep the player on track, leading us from corrupted arena to corrupted arena, lulling us into a sense of security that Bridge of Spirits is going to be supremely simple. But when we reach the base of Rusu's mountain and see this wide lake, the siblings wave their hand at Rusu's lookout sitting high above us and shrug that the bridge is broken. Guess we've got to find our own way up. This was one of my favourite moments for two reasons. The first is how the game visually presents the mammoth task of scaling Rusu's mountain by setting us so down low when we first see it. We don't stumble across the outpost halfway up the mountain, we're introduced to it here, where it seems so small and scaling off this hill seems so huge. We regularly hear about open world games which give the player vista moments, a vast, expansive view which shows the player all of the locations they will eventually travel to in the distance. Kena's title screen does just this after only 15 minutes of play. You can see Rusu's lookout, the village below, the mountain shrine in the distance, and the fields, but Bridge of Spirits is so aware of how gorgeous it is that it happily repeats these vista moments on the hour every hour. Seeing Rusu's lookout, the waterfall, the forestry, and the cliffs all in one shot adds to the gravitas of your upcoming journey. It's extremely powerful and it's shown to us without a cutscene. The second reason is that illusion of choice. It's typically thought of as a bad thing. The game just gives me the illusion of choice, and in some titles that can be the case. But the beauty of Bridge of Spirits world design is that it understands what it is and what it wants the player to do. In a game like Breath of the Wild, for example, you would have a vast array of options to get to the top of the mountain. You could spend time hunting for ingredients and cooking up a meal which will help you climb higher and faster. You could use your glider to wind your way up various platforms, and whilst I do think that emphasis on choice is impressive in that game, I really appreciate that Kena doesn't feel the need to replicate it, because in recent years, it's kinda become exhausting. Kena's story, her job, is to cleanse the rot in the forest. If she just scaled the cliff face in a way the designers didn't explicitly communicate, we might miss some of those key, cultivated gameplay beats, like the rot helping us straighten out this bridge to hop across. Scaling Rusu's mountain is fluid in how it expects you to navigate it. The wide lake has numerous secrets and collectibles for you to uncover if you wade out to it, but this is not the intended path. You can see an island with a mysterious blue flower waiting to be interacted with, a simple traversal puzzle you can only effect once you've unlocked the bow. With climbing, Bridge of Spirits regularly employs environmental hints in the eroded cliffs, signaling that Kena can scale them. But when you're on these cliff faces, there are options to the player. If you climb to the left and up, you can find a rot hat. If you climb down, you can slide down to the location of secret upgrade currency. If you climb to the right and hop from platform to platform, you'll find yourself on Rusu's main pathway. None of this is new, it's been done before in games from previous eras, and it's where the vintage comes into Kena's overall victory. But it's a go-to example of how some reviewers seemed to judge Kena by comparing it to games that it's not trying to be. Eurogamer wrote, Kena wants you to wonder where to find something, rather than what to do with it. It borrows an incredible amount of ideas. The climbing from Uncharted, the shooting of your bow from God of War, the amount of collectibles from pretty much everywhere, but none of it is presented in a way which makes me think Ember Lab know what makes a good puzzle or an interesting platforming sequence. I don't know about anyone else, but God of War wasn't a game I thought to compare this to at, well, any stage of my playtime, and a lack of originality is such a bizarre criticism to levy at Bridge of Spirits from an industry that lauds Call of Duty every year. At what point were we ever promised a game that would revolutionize platformers or action-adventure games? Kena is more interested in pulling from eras before the PlayStation 2. It's got more in common with Croc, Legend of the Gobbos, and God of War. Also, you'd think with such scathing criticism, Eurogamer would at least stay consistent, but here's what they had to say about the Rape Company's latest grey puddle. If you enjoy that classic Far Cry collect 'em up grind and simply want a brand new sandbox to explore and explode, you're going to be far from bored with all that Yara has to offer. And look, I'm not a video game journalist basher. I have very little time for arguments about video game journalist difficulty, They already feel outdated and petty, but it's enough to make you weep that writing such as this is part of the taste making of this industry. When a reviewer fundamentally misunderstands the purpose of a game and refuses to assess it on those merits, it hurts everyone, game designer or not. The world and level design isn't concerned with wasting your time and strumming the guitars of freedom to make you think the game is bigger than it is. And that is what I find so wonderful about Bridge of Spirits. Ember Lab gave us a tight, focused $30 game that knows what it is, where its influences come from, and is content to play around with those influences. And going by the fanbase Bridge of Spirits has gathered, it's clear there are plenty like me who are content to enjoy that. There's a tranquility which comes with exploration like this, but it's also a testament to how a smooth game engine can strengthen the exploration of a smaller game. The breathtaking density of the Vista moments adds so much, so that following a path and jumping on some platforms does feel like scaling a mountain, and it is fluid because the game strongly emphasizes the importance of going off the beaten path to find its various collectibles. This is what Josh Greer meant when he said the game had a wide, linear design. There is a clear path to follow, and there is a map to keep you right, but the lack of a mini-map adds so much because it doesn't distract from the game's aesthetic, meaning it's easy to get lost in the game world without getting overwhelmed, and that's a shockingly rare feeling in modern games.
That weapon you carry, I sense it holds a deeper power.
The staff belonged to my father. It's been in our family for generations.
He must have been a great spirit guide.
With his bow, Rusu comes across as the leading hunter and gatherer of the village community. He mentored Taro and taught him the survivalist instincts which would ultimately spell the explorer's doom. Keina's writing is lovely and subtle, so there isn't exactly a moment when Rusu sits us down and tells us he's racked with guilt over the death of the boy, but we're able to piece enough together to gain an understanding of why his spirit is still trapped in this land. Rusu also opens up this first biome even more, and I'm willing to bet I wasn't alone in my surprise when I realised his mountain was just a small part of the game's first third, and how it felt distinct yet in keeping with what we had seen so far. Due to the consistency in the statues, the types of flowers we see, and the flowing green colour palette, two diverse locations like a mountain and an overflowing misty forest both feel like they could naturally exist together. Every biome feels ancient but alive, suffering under the oppression of the corruption. The before and after of healing an area never ceases to be satisfying because of how traumatized the greenery is under the twisted sickly vines and how that corruption locks off potential routes to exploration. The grapple flowers are strangled by dark roots, pathways are blocked off by pulsing, writhing bulbs, and purging this disease from the landscape is almost soothing because it regularly happens outside of cutscenes, because it's such gradual healing that players get to witness in real time, and because the foliage has such an attention to detail. I mean, look at the moss on this rock. Really look at it. It looks like someone has carefully airbrushed it on in a model maker's shed. The visuals are more interesting and more impressive because Ember Lab don't care about realism, they care about this toy-like aesthetic, adding to the whimsy and fantasy of the world design. Yes, it's an over-exaggeration, but you can hear the colours in this game. God, it's so sexy I could eat it. The magic of Bridge of Spirits comes in how it reacts to Keina and the player, and it's not just with the flowers. Whilst our shield protects us from harm, lets us parry enemies, and unlocks doors, it's that fourth ability, lighting up luminescent torches, which strengthens how we fit into the world. This isn't just interaction for the sake of interaction, it's useful, which makes the player constantly think about how they can change a wood or a cave as they explore, how they can paint the world with their magic spirit juice. The fluidity continues in that ritualistic structure. We have one core goal, to uncover the 3 relics we need to summon Taro, but the player is given just enough freedom in which order they tackle them. Each relic protected by a puzzle we need to solve uses environmental details, like the number of candles on a shrine and the abilities we've amassed by this point, namely the bow. If Bridge of Spirits exploration could be described in one word, it would be clarity with a capital C. The ritual hunts rarely need a map to find. Their locations are clearly communicated to the player through how the puzzles are laid out. A shrine in the middle of a lake yells, "Look at me!" to a player. The huge winding tree in the center of the forest is obviously going to be hiding a relic, but the game keeps its handholding to a bare minimum, leaving the player to figure out how to navigate its trials.
Look, a tear of the forest. It's a sign of regrowth.
We'll discuss the game as a collect-a-thon more directly in a later section, but I'd be amiss if I didn't mention how powerful these memories can be to our sense of exploration. Whilst they're optional, they're a major reward to the player for venturing down one of the game's many alleys. Each spirit has 4 to find, and narratively, they add so much weight to the slow build-up to each major boss fight. Finding the relics is one big mission in learning about what happened to our boss, which makes battles like the Woodsmith more tragic and heartbreaking than epic and harrowing. It's a funny one because I don't know if you could wrap them up in the environmental storytelling banner because of how direct they are in what they show us, but because the player needs to hunt for this information by navigating the environment, maybe it does? Whilst they're not as convoluted as a Souls-like item description, they could fit snugly into that category, giving us snippets of our boss's lives before we need to whack them with our magic stick. That's not to say that Kena doesn't have any level narration. In fact, it has plenty. Rusu's outpost fleshes out his character as an outsider because of how removed it is from the rest of the community. The overgrown ancient ruins we regularly climb through tells us everything we need to know about how many cycles the village has gone through. Famine and natural disasters have racked this community for generations, but nature has grown over each civilization which is built on the ruins of the previous. Later, on the warrior's path, there's a grand statue of Toshi imposing in its posture and size, but it's hidden away from the main path, built out of respect, not idolatry, painting him as regal in the community but not egotistical. And with the story's focus on farming and famine, we regularly see how important growing fruit and vegetables were to the village. We don't just see these farms, we interact with them. We can use the rot to grow food and plants and are rewarded with finding rot or spirit currency for doing so. The player sees these empty fields ready to be plowed as valuable, just like how the village did before it was devastated. I don't know if Eurogamer had just had a bad day when they released their review, but the tranquility of the exploration, the fluidity of its level design, and the strength of the level narration stops these rituals from getting tedious or boring. They either played a different game to me or didn't give this one the time it deserves. And here is where my goodwill crumbled away for 2 full hours. Bridge of Spirits is layered with boss battles, but there are, by my count, 4 big bosses in the story. Taro, the Woodsmith, Toshi, and the Corrupted Rot God. 3 out of these 4 are fantastic. Taro is not. I'm going to discuss the nuances of Kena's combat more directly later, but as we're moving through the game chronologically, I'll touch on each of our big bads as they come up. Taro's battle has a lot of the instruments you would expect to make a rousing, bombastic beat, but due to a frustrating lack of polish, it feels less like an impressive guitar solo and more like the record keeps skipping. His presentation is awesome, with the lamp dangling around his neck, cavorting that neon yellow that we recognize as Rot Courage. Where some of Kena's enemies just use bulbous infection to highlight weak spots, this is one of the more creative signifiers we can get. Using the rot to distract him and reveal a second weak spot adds some fantastic depth to how we read him, and his violent, erratic moveset presents him as larger than life. All of this is great, but Taro is by far the most frustrating enemy to fight in the game because he feels so unfair. Let's take this move. He has a devastating jump attack that launches him on top of Kena, but the telegraphing for this attack always moves him backwards. Because he flails around like a rabid dog, you need to have quicksilver reflexes to be able to register what he's about to do. He looks like he's moving backwards, so you'd naturally assume that's what he's doing. Not only this, but parrying him opens up at best 2 free hits, and because his health bar is so big and Kena's standard attacks do such limited damage, he comes across as frustrating and spongy, forcing the player to try and keep their distance and focus instead on using their bow. This would be a great idea, reinforcing the power of Kena's new equipment in this boss battle, but the bow doesn't do that much damage either. This is all annoying, but not necessarily rage quit worthy. That award goes to his grab attack. That was super quick, I know, so let's play it back a little slower. Are we skipping frames here? It really looks like we are. You could park a car between Kena and his fist, but it looks like the game just teleports her into his grab, and this wipes out over half of her health. I can't tell you how many times I was certain I'd rolled out of the way or through his attacks just for the game to smack me with a newspaper and tut at me before crushing the life out of our priestess. And look, I know, none of you are watching this video for a breakdown on Kena's invincibility frames or hitbox. It's hardly the most interesting analysis in the room. But I like Kena's punishing combat. I love the majority of the bosses, but if a game is going to implement battles that kick your ass, it needs to earn goodwill from the player. Getting killed in games is fine, it can be part of the fun factor if handled correctly, but when a boss is programmed with such insane disregard for how hitboxes work, it dismantles any trust the player has built that the game will treat you fairly and with respect. Bridge of Spirits is a great game, and this is a blip which is not replicated at any other point. I cannot emphasize that enough, but it is so frustrating that Taro left such a sour taste in my mouth. I was here for 2 hours.
Even now, it's hard to forgive myself.
Taro, the children know how much you care for them. What happened in the village wasn't your fault.
And yet when all is said and done, and his spirit is purified, my irritation was washed away by the emotional goodbye he gets. With Taro reunited with his family, he embraces the beyond. Despite the characters only having a little bit of time on screen, seeing Taro, Benny, and Saya and Rusu leave filled me with sadness, and this was repeated 2 more times before the credits rolled. There's a melancholy which comes with characters exiting the story, and I think that's down to how lively and comforting they are in their presentation. You can't argue with visceral emotional reactions to these things, and the pit in my stomach told me everything I needed to know as I came to the end of Kena's first act. I cared about these spirits, and luckily, the game only gets stronger from here.
Energy has not flowed here for a long time. The land has begun to heal. Is this your doing?
My name is Kena. I helped Benny and Saya free Taro's spirit.
Hana reads Kena the same way that the other spirits do. She feels her power and connection to the world beyond, and this is contextualized in a gift, the Spirit Bomb, and passage to my favorite part of the game, the fields. The fields open with a sinister bang. For a few minutes, the greens of the game are violently torn apart and replaced with orange as we witness the famine in full swing. Smoke and flames rip through the farmlands. This is a smart choice. Up until now, we haven't learned about the natural disasters which swept through the village. Bridge of Spirits saves it for this smoky monstrosity we need to charge through. Once again, contrast is the game's greatest visual asset. Ridding the sky of the smoke is so gratifying and so pleasing with such a vast stage that it makes the fields exciting to explore when we can finally see our own way. Which brings me to Kena's collect-a-thon and the Metroidvania comparisons. There are 3 new abilities Kena can collect on her journey: the bow, the bomb, and the dash. Each one signifies the opening up of a new biome, but all 3 can be useful for completionists looking to backtrack and collect all of the things. Not only this, they match up with the 2 signifiers of good Metroidvania mechanics. They open up the world, and they build a better hero. The bow gives Kena a ranged attack, which helps her keep distance from stronger enemies, attack their explosive weak points, shoot down berries, play little archery minigames, easily strengthening her as a hero. But she can also use it as a grapple to zip up to vantage points, opening up the world by offering shortcuts and paths to more collectibles. This feels really slick due to the slow motion that cuts in when Kena is mid-air. Sliding down a slope and leaping off to zap up a ledge feels tight and powerful, and without the slow motion to ensure pinpoint accuracy, I don't think it would feel as good. The bombs can be used to blow rocks from the ground and have them hover in stasis for a few seconds to be used as platforms. In combat, they can also be used to hit enemies' weak points with a mighty range or act as a heavier attack. The best thing about these is how the game makes sure both items speak to each other during the more complicated platforming sections. The blue aura which steams off of rocks we can play with strums out a clear starting point for a lot of the little puzzles we encounter during exploration. A lot of the more interesting moments start with the bombs and use the bow to maneuver platforms into a position which make them climbable. It adds some much needed complexity to what can, on the surface, look like quite simple environmental obstacles. Unfortunately, the same can't be said for the dash. The dash can be used to zap between planes of reality, opening up Toshi's areas later, as well as allowing Kena to whoosh across larger chasms. In combat, it's incredibly powerful, giving Kena some serious invincibility frames, as well as stunning an enemy mid-attack, and taking off a chunk of damage with a couple of hard whacks. This is fantastic. I love this, especially the fighting editions, but despite being so powerful, the dash comes with a major disappointment, which made me realize something I didn't like so much about Kena's platforming. The dash does not work in conjunction to Kena's other abilities. It's pretty much only context-based. It's used to rush through violet force fields the player encounters in the game's final third, but there's no incentive for players to use it in earlier biomes. Aside from one or two bridges in Toshi's section, there are no gaps which need to dash over. The dash is never factored into the bomb or bow puzzles we see, and whilst it strengthens Kena in combat, it doesn't strengthen her in traversal. And the main reason for that is because you can not dash in mid-air. This one might be a little contentious, but on the whole, I don't like Kena's jump. It's too vertical, meaning when you launch her into the air, it can feel a little restrictive, like Kena isn't being launched far enough. At the risk of indulging in micro-analysis, the double jump makes it worse. When Kena hops into the air, it feels like she doesn't have any momentum, even with a solid run into it. Her sprint has a satisfying speed, but there's no catharsis when you jam your thumb into the X button because she slows right down. The double jump makes things even slower, likely because of the spinning animation which simulates an upward motion rather than up and forwards. I might be alone in this one, I know, but I didn't like it. So when I initially got the dash, my expectation was that I could use it in the air, mid-jump. If this was the case, it would build Kena up to be more nimble, offering more mid-air movement options, both for more complicated platforming and to help with getting clear of danger in combat. This second biome has a whole cave network called the Village Heart, with some of the most engaging platforming in the game. It's a long journey to the centre. There's a wide space with water to swim through, a complicated climb to the second floor, 3 combat arenas to contend with, an on-rails river of poison to travel through, and finally a fiery obstacle course. The first time through this area, the complicated work through is welcome, but there's a lot of rot and a lot of hats to go back for, and needing to repeat this awkward climb is frustrating when hunting for secrets. If Kena had a mid-air dash, then some wide platforms could have been put in place to give the player a shortcut to certain parts of the Village Heart cave. It's just one example, but there's some real room for growth in the platforming and Kena's agility, and many of my criticisms come back to this small gripe. It ripples out through every stage of the game, the combat, the level design, and the platforming.
What are you doing, big guy? Easy there, old friend. I'm happy to see you.
Oh, look at this stone bull, what a good boy. Did I have complaints again? I forget. The game's collect-a-thon is one of its best parts. There's a caveat to this too, but stick with me. There's a rhythm and rhyme to how we seek out the game's goodies that keeps the player hungry in the moment-to-moment gameplay. Collect-a-thons like Spyro or Crash Bandicoot litter their pathways with gems or Wumpa fruits that a second doesn't go by that the player isn't sucking up the shiny things. Kena's collect-a-thon doesn't adopt a process as indulgent as this, but that's not to say Bridge of Spirit is frigid with its collectibles. In fact, you're never more than 60 seconds away from something to find. And there is a lot to find. Rot, meditation spots, hats, karma, spirit mail, memories, and spirit currency are all tent poles, further segmented with baskets, berries, lanterns, archery minigames, corrupted chests, shrines, statues, and forest tiers. There's a plethora of ways the player can uncover secrets, but this plethora, this variety, remains consistent every step of the way. Nothing feels out of place or different for the sake of being different. Expectations are clearly communicated to a player in how they find every collectible. Seeing karma berries dangling from a tree clearly tells the player they need to shoot them down and send the rot over to feast like flies on old bread. I am the rot mother, feed my children! The lanterns are coloured a dull blue, so different from the vibrancy of the luminescent blues we see in the spirit crystals dotted throughout the world. Without a tutorial pop-up to spell out each little puzzle, the game trusts the player's reading of the visual motifs we're exposed to. But what I love most is how the game's collectibles connect to its themes, and how integral the rot are to uncovering its secrets. At the start of the game, the rot tasked Kena with healing the forest by blinking their big, adorable eyes at us and showing how sad all this darkness makes them. Mechanically, they're at the heart of this healing. This isn't an exhaustive list, but we use the rot to purify dead zones, return statues to their appropriate place, grow crops, cleanse shrines, find more rot, and move platforms in place to reach other secrets. That's just a small handful of ways that they help, but they're a constant in our decision making. Everything Kena does is to either help the rot, the spirits, or the forest itself. None of our hunt feels random or unimportant. It always feels like we're doing good little deeds to heal what ails the village and the forest. We discussed this in my Spiral critique, but if a title is going to have collectibles as a primary part of its game design, it needs to be molded into the other parts of the game. Collecting stuff needs to connect to survival in some capacity, and Kena, just like Spyro, does just that. With every new rot which joins the team, Kena's power grows. Having more rot opens up new pathways in Kena's skill tree, and offers up more courage and possibilities in combat. It also strengthens their spirit form to last longer, meaning you can use forest tiers to reach faraway corrupted shrines. This all fully incentivizes exploration. It's not just the rot though. Healing the forest, doing good deeds is rewarded in karma. Karma, in turn, is used as skill points to bolster Kena's ammunition, give her new moves, or empower her current ones to be more effective. Finding the meditation spots in particular increases Kena's HP. There's no soundtrack here, just the gorgeous visuals and the peacefulness of the forest. Because Kena's physical damage doesn't increase, battles often turn into a war of attrition, so increasing her health is key to surviving. On the other hand, Spirit Mail is a major missed opportunity. This requires a lot from the player. They're the most difficult items to find in each biome, often scurried away, and after finding them, Kena needs to bring them back to the village, find the house that mail is connected to, and then complete a challenge of some sort to cleanse it. Adding steps to a collectible is great, and watching the village blossom into visual harmony slowly but surely is incredibly rewarding. But the Spirit Mail is missing something that would elevate it to greatness. Stories. We get little outlines of these spirits, these blue wispy shapes which thank Kena for passing on. We get riddles for where the mail is, giving us hints to who these people were, what they were like. Hell, sometimes we even get names, but that is all. It wouldn't need to be a fully animated cutscene like with the rest of the game, although they would be great rewards, but at least a diary entry or an audio clip of a spirit sharing their thoughts on the village's final days would help solidify the identity of this community. Without these, we're given very little reward for a lot of effort, especially in comparison to how generous Bridge of Spirits is elsewhere for a lot less. And speaking of effort, there are definitely some rough edges to elements of Kena's economy. The hat carts are fun, let's get that out of the way straight off the bat. Picking dumb little looks for our fuzzy little goo balls are where a lot of the game's sincerity washes away in favour of silliness and giggles. Yet in saying that, after Taro, Benny and Saya left the game, the first thing I did was try to immortalise them by buying their masks for 3 of my rot, and that filled me with warmth that kept the melancholy at bay. This is all lovely. but I think the whole concept of the spirit economy is kinda flawed. The reality is, Bridge of Spirits is too simple a game to have two currencies, and the game favours one over the other. By the 2/3 mark, I was drowning in spirit juice. It's hidden in lamps, crystals, baskets, chests, but had to backtrack and do some good deeds to blow up my karma. Karma is the more valuable of the two, as it's our upgrade currency, but spirit energy is only useful for buying hats for the rot. And by the 6th hour, this novelty does begin to wear off. Now there are a few solutions to this. The first is to add more stuff for the player to buy outside of hats. Clothes for Kena, a colour change to her staff, skins for the rot. The second is to get rid of spirit currency and just have karma. This would mean the player needs to juggle the fleshing out of Kena's abilities with the fun new hats they collect along the way. Or the third way would be to just do away with the rot carts altogether. The excitement of finding a hat is diluted because when a player finds one, they can't just jump into the menu and equip it to their rot. They need to find the hat, find a cart, hope they have enough spirit currency to buy the hat they found, and then equip it. It's quite the rigmarole to go through just to make the rot look like they're on a baseball team, and it breaks up that fluidity of gameplay I mentioned earlier. And on top of this, for reasons I don't fully understand, there is a limit to the amount of each hat we can buy. The character masks I understand, it wouldn't make sense to have 50 Hannahs follow me around, but cowboy hats? Why is there a limit here? I want an army of cowboy rot. I want them all to be in uniform for when we rush into battle. This seems like an unnecessary limitation. Just like with Taro, finding Adira's 3 relics summons her in boss form. She and Hannah were partners and woodsmiths of the village, who managed to harness the spirit energy of the mountain and turn it into physical objects, like our bombs. But the cycle of the village and the mountain and the forest came to this community anyway, and the work they had done was, well, undone. Adira isn't perfect, but she's my favourite boss in the game. Her form is imposing, her arena is tight and claustrophobic, where the floor is your enemy due to her area of effect attacks, so the player always feels on the defensive. This is the scrappiest feeling battle in the whole game, even if you play it perfectly. There's a requirement to use our new skill, the bomb, and our bow, to explode the heart of the tower and momentarily weaken her for a few free hits. Her second phase is just as savage as Taro's, moving away from slow, lumbering hits with a great reach to an emphasis on speed, dual-wielding her blade and her hammer, which means that the player can't get too comfortable with a single playstyle. Where this battle dips is its heavy reliance on standard enemies. They plop out of the air, distracting your attention from Adira herself, and in a fight where you need to be wary of rocks falling from the ceiling, the heart of the shrine, and Adira's wide hammer, parts of this battle can feel like you're swatting flies with one hand while taming a bull with the other, and we'd all just rather be taming the bull.
Somehow I felt leaving would make me forget her. The life we shared would slip away. That fear blinded me, and I tore apart everything we created.
I've lost someone too, and the thought of forgetting them scares me.
What I appreciate about Adira's resolution is how it gives Kena the opportunity to empathize with her directly. She explains that she's lost someone just like the woodsmith, and it's our first hint that Kena, just like the rest of our spirits, is in mourning, tied to the village through her grief. And when she leaves the fields and returns to the village, the game is primed to capitalize on this.
I think the Souls comparison you made earlier, and I know you weren't really comparing, but you're talking about difficulty, it's kind of apt, because that did pop in my mind a few times as I was playing through. Some of these boss fights were reminiscent of me fighting Orphan of Kos in Bloodborne, which is, like, for people who know, that is the most difficult, or one of the most difficult boss fights you'll get in the Bloodborne DLC.
I've made a few offhand references to Dark Souls in this video, but just to clear the air, Bridge of Spirits is not a Souls-like, nor is it trying to be. You could argue it has more in common with The Legend of Zelda, except my weapon doesn't break every 2 seconds. Sweet Christ! Despite there being a punishing difficulty curve on normal, hard, or master difficulty, that's really where the combat comparisons stop, and as we've learned over the past decade, difficult doesn't equal Souls-like. There's a tonal shift between exploration and combat, right down to the visuals. In battle, the charm is wiped away, replaced with something ferocious and aggressive. And whilst the atmosphere becoming more dense and harrowing when Kena readies her staff is intoxicating, alerting the player to how seriously these combat scenarios should be taken, I'm not convinced that it flows. I can count on one hand the amount of times my general exploration was interrupted by an enemy popping its head into view. Whilst exploration and combat merge together mechanically, requiring you to seek out ways to strengthen Kena as a character rather than earning XP from bonking baddies on the head, the fighty bits are significantly segmented from the non-fighty bits, meaning we're left with a game of 2 halves. You see a dead zone with a rotting bulb at its centre. You enter the arena and enemies spawn indefinitely until you can kill enough of them to cleanse the space. This is great in its own right. It links with the ritualistic nature of our playtime, but I wish that enemy encounters weren't as telegraphed as they are. Whilst the arenas we regularly get caught in have an epicness to their presentation, I mean, look at this clip here where we're fighting the warrior. It's a dojo platform in the middle of a lake, which carries a real sense of climax despite just being another mini-boss. I wish the arenas weren't arenas. Aside from battles like this one in Taro's Forest, where there are a group of baddies to fight across 2 tree trunks, there's usually very little happening environmentally in these spaces, just a round room and a short aggro range, meaning at times Kena can accidentally get knocked out of bounds and the battle will reset. As much as I love Kena's combat, and I'll highlight why shortly, I'd love it a hell of a lot more if it didn't feel restricted to set arenas around the world. Some roaming enemies would help blur the lines between a fighty bit and an explory bit.
I can feel your true intent. You pretend to care for these spirits, but really, you only serve yourself. You cannot hide your weakness from me.
With the final biome being more combat heavy and dedicated to Toshi's fiery rage, it serves as a perfect example of this. Journeying up to the mountain shrine, Kena is faced with a clear boss arena. Using the mask, the hate filled in Toshi's spirit is too much for Kena to handle, and with the power Toshi has stolen from the mountain, he blasts Kena into the spirit realm. I'll discuss any potential for a sequel in the next section, but this ability for spirit guides to travel between worlds opens up so many cool ideas that I hope are built on in a later game. We see the heartbreaking moment that a young Kena, with the strength of her grief, found herself lost in the spirit world, looking for her father, and it's implied that this tragedy is what connects her so deeply to the other spirits. What I really love though, is when Kena says this to Zajiro.
My father told me stories of the sacred mountain shrine and its connection to the spirit realm. After I lost him, I set out to find the shrine, hoping it would make me a better spirit guide.
And it dawns on the player that this is, in fact, what's been happening the entire game. Kena has grown in both body and spirit during her adventure, becoming more in tune with her staff to unlock the bow, harnessing spirit energy to form bonds, becoming stronger in her abilities by helping the forest around the mountain heal. Her motivation to become a better spirit guide has been developed through our gameplay, and that's a really neat, explicit epiphany to leave until 2/3 in. Rather than giving the player a third full biome to explore, Toshi's section unravels from the central village, helping us nourish our hub even further by following 3 branching paths. We need to meet and battle the 3 sides to Toshi: the hunter, the mask maker, and the warrior. The hunter path is probably my favourite. There are traps here for us to avoid, using our dash to escape from spirit cages laden in this misty bog, reinforcing Toshi's gravitas as a hunter in the village and reinforcing Kena's contrast as a gatherer. Each of these 3 paths carve out a unique facet to Toshi's identity though, despite being surprisingly linear. Kena is funneled from combat arena to combat arena, dealing with new twists on battle like the malevolent spirits that need the dash to rip them into the physical world, or mages which can drain Kena's HP down to make her more vulnerable to a one-hit kill. And speaking of enemies, variety is the name of the game with Bridge of Spirits. It's shocking to me how wooden carvings can feel so unique and so distinct from each other that once you recognize which enemy is which, a differentiated strategy to take them down can form in the folds of your brain. You've got the standard grunts, little shield enemies, bomb throwing enemies, enemies which are bombs, flying enemies, these guys suck, turtles, lizards, larger soldiers, elite grunts, primates which jump about trees, wraiths, and as the difficulty curve increases, some of our bosses are demoted to mini-bosses to keep us on our toes. And speaking of which, let's talk about the bosses. Removing the big story bosses still means that the game can boast 12 further heavies, and despite the visual similarities, they're shockingly not dull reskins. And to prove that, I'm going to list and show them, so bear with me. We have the Sprout, the Kappa, the Wood Knight, the Sprout Captain, the Mage, the Shrine Guardian, Vine Knight, Stone Guardian, Rot Eater, the Mask Maker, the Hunter, and the Warrior. And while Bridge of Spirits isn't going to win any awards for boss names, the Sprout really, the similarities in their titles don't translate to the similarity in strategies needed to take them down. The Stone Guardian requires a player use bombs to blow away the stone paneling to reveal useful weak points, whereas the Shrine Guardian has a dead zone bulb on its back that begs tactical usage of the Rot as a heavy attack. Their movesets are different, their weaknesses are familiar but require a recalibration of thought, and they all pack one hell of a punch. In the base game, Kena is armed with a light attack, a heavy attack, a roll, a shield, and a parry. Her damage output for these attacks doesn't change. From your first encounter with standard grunts to the final fight with Toshi, the physical strength of Kena's attacks remain pretty damn weak. This is reflected in the sound design. A quick bonk with the staff sounds as weak as it feels. Striking an enemy with an arrow is slightly more powerful, but not by much, and the grenade is even more powerful, but the impact isn't what you'd expect, which means the player needs to focus on the weak points given to us and the Rot abilities we unlock. The difference between a fully charged heavy attack and the much more destructive Rot hammer is night and day. This means that Kena's combat is all about endurance. Last long enough in a fight and get enough mosquito bites in to earn the Rot courage needed to do the real damage. That's how you temper each boss battle or each horde fight. The difficulty curve comes in the fact enemies hit harder and move faster the further into the adventure you get, and as Kena is given more tools and more choices to be creative in fights, the simple hack and slash method of the first few hours fades into the background. There's real depth to these systems, despite how simple they initially appear. This is the easiest way to assess if a combat system is interesting or not. Not every combat system needs a stamina bar to be engaging. Kena has a quick roll to get out of harm's way which doesn't have a limit on its use, but her hitbox actually elongates when she's looking to dodge, so you need to time these carefully. Sometimes an enemy is simply too fast to rely on the dodge, so the player is forced to consider their other defensive options, like the shield or the parry. However, the shield has limited use and takes time to regenerate, so you need to alternate between this, a well-timed parry, and the dodge to keep Kena alive. I've referenced this before, but giving a player options and choice in battle simply isn't enough to enhance your combat. Marvel's Avengers, a game which has somehow gotten worse since launch, has plenty of choice, but none of the enemy types or combat scenarios force the player to consider any of those choices. Kena really does force you to play with the tools you're given, to read an enemy's design, to find what works best. To take an immediate example, let's look at one of the bosses of Toshi's area, the Warrior. He has a dire swipe attack which sends out a wall of spirit energy you cannot avoid. The only way to break through this is to use the dash, or take the small Rot Eaters, these little turtle buggers. They are so robust that they can only be weakened by using the grenade. You cannot beat this game by mindlessly spamming R1 because it remains the weakest and clumsiest option from start to finish. This keeps battles so engaging that I honestly could have done with a boss rush mode unlocking once the credits rolled. Missed opportunity there, Ember Lab, maybe something to consider with the physical release. My greatest gripe is with the parry system. Contextually, these are gorgeous, and forcing the player to prime a parry up like a shield to release when an enemy smacks you stops the player from spamming their parries without making the timing overly precise. However, parries are not that easy to pull off, and when you do, the opening it gives you to get a quick hit in is too small that the risk isn't worth the reward. On the flip side, healing is where you can feel the game's creative juices flow. Outside of combat, Kena will just heal as she explores, but when you're in a duel with someone like the Mask Maker, the game dots a couple of healing plants around the arena. Activating these requires Kena to have a rot charge ready to use, and she needs to maneuver close enough for the rot to react to it. And you can only use each healing plant once, so it introduces a bit of resource management to each fight. Do you want to play it safe and heal up, or do you want to use your rot charge to blast a powerful arrow at your enemy? Are you playing the long game, or do you want to go back in for a quick and messy takedown? I feel like I haven't given the rot their due so far, and that's mainly because I wanted to save them for our discussion of combat. I can't imagine a Kena combat system without the rot to make it feel meaty and comprehensive. All of our power comes from their being here, which makes me slightly worried about how they contextualize Kena's abilities in future games. Unless you get a specific upgrade, Kena will always start a battle on her own without her support, and you need to inspire courage in them to make them contribute. Naturally, courage is inspired by knocking 2 blocks out of a grunt, but I love how the upgrade, which brings the rot into the fight from the very beginning, isn't accessible until the end of the skill tree. It's like the more time the rot spend with Kena, the more of their friends that she and we find, the more confident they become in our abilities on the battleground. For a team of 10, it's truly astounding the little details Ember Lab gave the rot depending on which goon you're battling. They can stagger a sprout so they shut down and give Kena an opening. They can wrench Taro's arm up to reveal a weak spot on his armpit. There's a context for each big enemy which changes how the rot ruin their day. Oh, I love this game! One of the more polarizing things about the rot is their spirit form. I mentioned this in passing, but you can find rot tears throughout the world, and planting these gives Kena the chance to guide the rot as a single entity through dark passageways to light the way, or to clear corrupted vines blocking off pathways. But sometimes, the game switches up battle by dropping a tear in the middle of a combat arena, meaning we can use the rot's devastating slam and swipe attacks to end enemies in just 1 or 2 hits. I like this. Kind of. I definitely don't despise it as much as Kotaku does. They wrote a whole article on it, claiming it was an archaic design choice because they don't have dictionaries in their office. They wrote, "The physical experience..." Oh, wait, it was written by the Australian team. I can't do Australian accents, fuck it. "The physical experience of swinging the rot side to side or making several dragging motions towards your character is nothing short of mechanically unpleasant." Does this look mechanically unpleasant to you? It didn't feel like it to me, and I don't see anything particularly archaic about the idea of the rot tears. Despite Kena living and breathing its influences, I think the rot tears are actually one of the areas its vintageness feels a little less vintage. Controlling the rot as one force feels quite fresh, and the slow speed you get in combat is countered by just how powerful their attacks are. The Rot Eater boss lasted less than a couple of minutes because I managed to manipulate the tier in that area to just wreck its day. Hope this thing doesn't have a family. In general exploration, yes, controlling this entity could feel about 25% faster, I guess, but I didn't mind the slight tug I got from our gang of blobs. It reminded me a lot of Psychonauts, which simulated that sense of dragging an object around a room via telekinesis, and it never annoyed me to the level I wanted to write an article or make a video about it. That Kotaku article did, though.
Your will is strong, Spirit Guide. The power of the mountain shrine is mine. I took it to save my people.
It's time, Toshi.
Narratively, witnessing how easily Toshi destroyed Kena in their first confrontation makes this battle feel climactic all on its own, and that's without the gorgeous animation or the ominous music droning beneath their showdown. We've already fought Toshi 3 times before this final battle. His 3 phases are enough of a challenge separately, so the foreboding understanding that his boss will likely combine the toughest parts of all 3 makes the idea of him more challenging than what we're faced with. That's not to say Toshi's a pushover, far from it. He brings in the projectiles of the hunter, the area of effect attacks of the warrior, and the speed and invisibility of the mask maker. His attacks are fast and strong with a far reach. He doesn't just block our hits, he can deflect them, meaning the tried and true strategy of keeping your distance and cheesing him with arrows isn't possible here. He can be staggered, so none of this battle feels cheap, but he doesn't flinch back with the same sort of winces we've expected from Taro and the Woodsmith. Kena, even with her upgrades, feels like a midgie on the back of a bear. You'd think the wide space would be a blessing in this fight, but it's actually a curse. Toshi's toughest attacks happen when you've got a good distance between the two of you, so it tricks the player into thinking they can play this battle slow and steady. It's a great boss fight, forcing the player to use every combat strategy they've picked up across his 3 pathways to take him down. If you've been paying attention to what the game is intrinsically trying to teach you, stay aggressive, don't be afraid to dash, make the most of your rot abilities, you should be alright.
Together, the rot are quite powerful, but I have faced them once before. You may think you know these creatures. Let me show you their true nature.
And as much as I love Toshi's boss fight, the game saves its greatest challenge until last. I love Bridge of Spirits ending, I'm just sad that it had to end. That's not to say I wish it had been padded out further. I would have been happy with one more biome. Perhaps when Kena is banished to the spirit realm, we could have had a short section navigating that without the help of the rot, but I'm thankful the game doesn't outstay its welcome. In fact, I think it's one of Bridge of Spirits' greatest assets. It knows what it comes here to do, it knows what it wants the player to feel, it hits those beats, gives us that experience, and moves on. It's not much of a twist that the rot are transformed into a monstrosity. For the first hour, when Benny and Saya note that our fuzzy pals are new to the forest and that they appeared shortly after everything went to hell, it's clear the game is building up to a heartbreaking change of tact, where Kena needs to be split from them to purify the village once and for all. If that wasn't clear enough, their name certainly is. The forest is rotting. I wonder if sentient black Gobbos called the Rot has anything to do with it. What is a twist is just how engaging and just how challenging this final battle is. The corrupted rock god killed me almost as much as Taro did, but the difference was, every single time it happened, it was my fault. This is a battle which demands the player use everything they've learned, magnifying the challenges we've been faced with during the rest of our adventure and funneling it into this final confrontation. It jumps through 5 full stages. Stage 1, you fight the corrupt rot god in a wide arena, making the most of Kena's space, but robbed of your rot abilities, which makes her feel vulnerable. The player must use the bow to shoot out the god's weak spots, and there's no way to get up and use her melee attacks. Stage 2, you work through waves of enemies, and without the special rot attacks, it's a scrappy game of dodging and parrying. Most notably, the mini rot eaters make another appearance, which forces the player to use their bombs to blow them apart and the dash to travel to the next stage. Stage 3, we return to face the Rot God once again, who's now a little faster and more aggressive in his attacks. Completing the previous stage awards Kena just 1 Rot charge, so that if she needs to, she can heal when she drops into Stage 3. Through the simple act of cutting us off from the Rot for 5 minutes, the player and Kena feel extremely vulnerable. We've been stripped right back to underdog status. Stage 4, this is all about platforming, with some of the more complex jumps in the game relying on our grapple to pull us from flower to flower. I like the idea of this being here more than the execution. The issue is that if you fall, there's no punishment from the game. Kena just resets to the start of the stage. Some opportunities for us to use our bomb to move platforms into place like we'd done in the fields, or the inclusion of our mid-air dash, would have added some further difficulty to this to really challenge the player. Stage 5 is the final confrontation with the Rot God, and this is where it all goes to hell. The arena is far smaller than before. Rocks crumble from the ceiling like in the woodsmith's fight, so you need to keep Kena in the air as much as possible. The rock god can send out random lightning bursts, so when you see it telegraph, the shield is a must. It blasts a laser from its mouth, forcing us to use the dash. This battle brings it all back to the central conceit of Kena's combat: endurance. You need to last it out until the rock god yells at the sky and prepares its lightning attack so we can send our rot up to pull a spear from its back. The best thing about this battle is how it makes a deliberate point of using all of Kena's abilities: the grapple, the bow, the bombs, the dash, the rot, to herald a final grandiose climax to the game. There are layers upon layers, but the difficulty curve doesn't feel forced. It feels well and truly in line with what we've faced so far, which adds to the satisfaction of taking down this big, angry bugger once and for all.
Zajiro once told me, change was an essential part of life. He understood the Rot God's purpose. Fear drove my actions, and I destroyed something beautiful.
Toshi inhabits all 5 stages of grief in one man. We see his denial, his bargaining, his depression, and his anger in how he reacts to the rot and the natural cycle that it brings to the village. He loses his people and they look to him for answers. He's incredibly empathetic in his draw to the mountain shrine and his belief that cutting the rot out of the equation would be the best thing for his people. What ties him to the shrine, what stops him from moving on, is the guilt he feels for killing Zajiro. A choice I initially felt was unnecessary, like the game was afraid to let Toshi just be empathetic, but on reflection and after a second playthrough, I think this moment makes more sense in hindsight. When we're grieving, we can do terrible things, push away those that we love, and Toshi's downfall embodies all of that. It isn't until Kena's intervention that we see that final stage though: acceptance. When she says to Toshi that grief is natural but it can imprison us, change who we are, she's creating a direct link between the game's themes and the rot god itself. Just like grief, the rot god is natural, it's part of a cycle, but the famine and the disasters which come from that cycle changed who Toshi was and made him do terrible things. With Toshi defeated, Kena has just one task left, one spirit to help pass on: the rot god itself, and as it vanishes, passing on to the spirit realm, it leaves Kena with a quiet moment of peace. She meditates and reflects, and the story leaves her healed and accepting of her own father's passing. Bridge of Spirits doesn't bring any new dimensions to its considerations of being trapped by grief, but it doesn't need to. It doesn't set out to challenge a player's belief system, it sets out to be a meditative, ritualistic, healing experience, just like Kena nurturing the growth of the forest. Not every game needs to chew on its themes and spit them back in the player's mouth like The Last of Us 2. Not every game needs to revolutionize the concept of empathy like Undertale. Not every game needs to sit the player down and have a Socratic dialogue with them like The Forgotten City. Sometimes all a game needs to do is be confident in its message and ensure its story, characters, and mechanics regularly reference that message. And that's what Bridge of Spirits does so powerfully. It's comprehensive.
You already know the rhythm and flow from countless other games. It's 2018's God of War without gruesome finishing moves. It's Ghost of Tsushima without the expansive cast of characters. It's Horizon Zero Dawn without the sprawling scope. So, shockingly everybody, a game that was made by 15 people that did not come out with an RRP that was full AAA game price, was not able to completely compete with God of War, made by Santa Monica Studio, Ghost of Tsushima, made by Sucker Punch, and Horizon Zero Dawn, made by Guerrilla. All massive, extremely well-funded, first-party Sony developers.
I made this video for 2 reasons. The first is because I loved my time with this game and I wanted to talk about it, but the second is to voice a serious defense of Bridge of Spirits in its current state. Despite the accolades and the high Metacritic score, some of the most vocal criticisms I've heard are asking that the game be transformed into something it doesn't need to be. Like a band releasing an earwormy album that enraptures a core fanbase, they've established what makes this world and this title so absorbing in just one game, their first game. With rumours that Ember Lab might be bought by a bigger publisher, I am worried that when the time comes to innovate on Kena 2, the wrong lessons might be learned, meaning their follow-up album might have a couple of bops, but will lose that magic which has made me love this first game so much. So just to be clear, Kena doesn't need a vast open world, it doesn't need to be 50 hours long, it doesn't need to sacrifice its vintage warmth to revolutionise the games industry. My fear is that Ember Lab takes that vocal minority to heart, and the sequel will try to be the next Breath of the Wild when what it should do is look at the transition of platformers like Spyro the Dragon 1 to Spyro the Dragon 2. That sequel built on its foundations to polish out the rough edges, and there's a lot of potential here for Kena to do the same. So with that in mind, let's talk sequel. The Rot God passing on to the next realm leaves me unsure about what Kena 2 will hold. I struggle to imagine another adventure for our priestess without the fluidity, creativity and joy that the Rot bring to the moment-to-moment decision-making and overall tone of the game world. But this ending does feel quite final for the Rot. Its cycle has completed, it's off to slumber in the spirit world. It would also be all too easy for Kena to retread the same territory. She heads off to a new land, to a new village, and helps those spirits pass on with new abilities and movesets, but I hope this isn't what happens. When Kena is banished to the spirit realm, I was disappointed we didn't get to explore this land further, so I think it would be a great continuation of her story to throw her into an established locale of the spirit world. It would give Ember Lab the opportunity to flesh out Kena's character. Perhaps she can try to find her father, or the energy flowing through her veins, the one that the Rot seems so concerned about, might need a cure only available in the great beyond. Regardless, it would mean Ember Lab could stretch their legs even further with new creative enemy designs that don't need to be linked with bark and wood imagery. It would mean that some of the platforming could be a little more zany and less reliant on the natural growth of a realistic world. It would mean the colour palette could pull itself away from the many shades of green that Bridge of Spirits explores so fully that returning to world design like this would feel like a mistake. What I'm imagining is the sort of world building we see in The Last Airbender. The land of the Benders is gorgeous and fascinating, but Kena has an idea, has the potential to take us to more fantastical lands. The sort of spirit realm we see in that show, with incredulous character designs. And if Kena does venture into the land of the spirits, it would let her team up with the Rot once again. Presumably that's where it's gone to rest. It could seek her out and offer its help in whichever journey or adventure she's chosen to take on. It's just a couple of ideas. Hell, we might not even get a sequel to Bridge of Spirits, but I'm sure whatever Ember Lab brings us in the future will capture me the same way that Kena's story did. After all, Kena made me believe that vinyl is making a comeback. Thanks for watching, and hey, happy Halloween when it comes. Next month I'm looking to release the next Nubis Humanus video and a full critique of Guardians of the Galaxy. On screen now are my patrons, massive shout out and thank you to them. They're making my dream of doing this full time look more and more like a reality every day, so order of thanks go to Torstein Sunness, Fipsy, Derek DeRosia, Luca, Tom Inns, Heliquin, Matthias Santoro, Retarget, Sierra Purnell, Tectus, James Keysbury, Jordan, Kazi7, Uncle Mr. Bones, Albert Calez, Stephen Aitkins, Austin Hagerman, Chris Mitchell, Lee, Morgan, Austin Long, Type Braz, Matthew Bendel, Dini, Zachary Powers, Andrew Muinos, Compulsory Fungus, Loire Zappelli, Dan Kank, Prospero, previously Harry and back and hotter, Nehoeng Guterres Nopoff, Lizzie Gale, Salvador Castillo, Alan Black, Callsign Noor, David Bedard, Ross Williamson, Derek 8, The Riftmaker, CC, Jared Helfer, Scott Russell, Graham McLaughlin, Semlin, Beth Littler, Oliver Farrell, John Foster Agg, Robert Capel, Elevator, Rose Bernarda, Matt McCulloch, Ethan, Paul W, Damp Gibbon, Please Don't Blame, Chief Sweep, Ehor May, Jonathan Lum, Thomas Banchak, Eddie Wingfors, Reese Newton Seeley, Nicholas Here, Cakesters, Strupp, Angry Optimist, Plague Doctor, Adriana Martinez, Jana Grasfrau, Chris, Jake Klosovitz, Long Cheddar, Jordan Halsey, Amory Selden, DB Geek, Ryan Smith, Toxter, Donis Conva, Ashley Broning, 100 Sams, Neil Dudgeon, Michael Diaz, Nathaniel Waters, Dinkin Pearson, Kyle Pears, Chris KK Mack, Seb Scott, Lonely Ronan, Chris Bread, Zephyr Don, Kane Highwind, Neve Kerr, and Johnny Miller. Oh, I just did all of that in one take and I don't know why. Thanks very much for your support again, guys, and thank you again for those of you who have stuck to the end, and take care.